Section 41 of Gray's Anatomy, Part 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Laurie Ann Walden. Anatomy of the Human Body, Part 2, by Henry Gray. The muscles and fascia of the perineum. The perineum corresponds to the outlet of the pelvis. Its deep boundaries are, in front, the pubic arch and the arcuate ligament of the pubis; behind, the tip of the coccyx; and on either side, the inferior rami of the pubis and ischium, and the sacrotuberous ligament. The space is somewhat lozenge-shaped, and is limited on the surface of the body by the scrotum in front, by the buttocks behind, and laterally by the medial side of the thigh. A line drawn transversely across in front of the ischial tuberosities divides the space into two portions. The posterior contains the termination of the anal canal, and is known as the anal region. The anterior, which contains the external urogenital organs, is termed the urogenital region. The muscles of the perineum may therefore be divided into two groups: 1. Those of the anal region; 2. Those of the urogenital region, A in the male, B in the female. 1. The muscles of the anal region: corrugator cutis ani, sphincter ani externus, sphincter ani internus. The superficial fascia. The superficial fascia is very thick, areolar in texture, and contains much fat in its meshes. On either side a pad of fatty tissue extends deeply between the levator ani and obturator internus into a space known as the ischiorectal fossa. The deep fascia. The deep fascia forms the lining of the ischiorectal fossa. It comprises the anal fascia and the portion of the obturator fascia below the origin of levator ani. Ischiorectal fossa, fossa ischiorectalis. The fossa is somewhat prismatic in shape, with its base directed to the surface of the perineum, and its apex at the line of meeting of the obturator and anal fascia. It is bounded medially by the sphincter ani externus and the anal fascia; laterally by the tuberosity of the ischium and the obturator fascia; anteriorly by the fascia of Colles covering the transversus perinei superficialis, and by the inferior fascia of the urogenital diaphragm; posteriorly by the gluteus maximus and the sacrotuberous ligament. Crossing the space transversely are the inferior hemorrhoidal vessels and nerves. At the back part are the perineal and perforating cutaneous branches of the pudendal plexus, while from the fore part the posterior scrotal or labial vessels and nerves emerge. The internal pudendal vessels and pudendal nerve lie in Alcock's canal on the lateral wall. The fossa is filled with fatty tissue, across which numerous fibrous bands extend from side to side. The corrugator cutis ani. Around the anus is a thin stratum of involuntary muscular fiber which radiates from the orifice. Medially the fibers fade off into the submucous tissue, while laterally they blend with the true skin. By its contraction it raises the skin into ridges around the margin of the anus. The sphincter ani externus, external sphincter ani, is a flat plane of muscular fibers, elliptical in shape, and intimately adherent to the integument surrounding the margin of the anus. It measures about 8 to 10 centimeters in length, from its anterior to its posterior extremity, and is about 2.5 centimeters broad, opposite the anus. It consists of two strata, superficial and deep. The superficial, constituting the main portion of the muscle, arises from a narrow tendinous band, the anococcygeal raphe, which stretches from the tip of the coccyx to the posterior margin of the anus. It forms two flattened planes of muscular tissue, which encircle the anus and meet in front to be inserted into the central tendinous point of the perineum, joining with the transversus perinei superficialis, the levator ani, and the bulbo cavernosus. The deeper portion forms a complete sphincter to the anal canal. Its fibers surround the canal, closely applied to the sphincter ani internus, and in front blend with the other muscles at the central point of the perineum. In a considerable proportion of cases the fibers decussate in front of the anus and are continuous with the transversi perineae superficialis. Posteriorly they are not attached to the coccyx, but are continuous with those of the opposite side behind the anal canal. The upper edge of the muscle is ill defined, since fibers are given off from it to join the levator ani. Nerve supply. A branch from the fourth sacral and twigs from the inferior hemorrhoidal branch of the pudendal supply the muscle. Actions. The action of this muscle is peculiar. 1. It is, like other muscles, always in a state of tonic contraction, and having no antagonistic muscle, it keeps the anal canal and orifice closed. 2. It can be put into a condition of greater contraction under the influence of the will, so as more firmly to occlude the anal aperture, in expiratory efforts unconnected with defecation. 3. Taking its fixed point at the coccyx, it helps to fix the central point of the perineum, so that the bulbo cavernosus may act from this fixed point. The sphincter ani internus, internal sphincter ani, is a muscular ring which surrounds about 2.5 centimeters of the anal canal. Its inferior border is in contact with, but quite separate from, the sphincter ani externus. It is about 5 millimeters thick, and is formed by an aggregation of the involuntary circular fibers of the intestine. Its lower border is about 6 millimeters from the orifice of the anus. Actions. Its action is entirely involuntary. It helps the sphincter ani externus to occlude the anal aperture and aids in the expulsion of the feces. 2. A. The muscles of the urogenital region in the male. Transversus perineae superficialis, bulbo cavernosus, ischio cavernosus, transversus perineae profundus, sphincter urethrae membranaceae. Superficial fascia. The superficial fascia of this region consists of two layers, superficial and deep. The superficial layer is thick, loose, areolar in texture, and contains in its meshes much adipose tissue, the amount of which varies in different subjects. In front it is continuous with the dartose tunic of the scrotum, behind with the subcutaneous areolar tissue surrounding the anus, and on either side with the same fascia on the inner sides of the thigh. In the middle line it is adherent to the skin on the raphe and to the deep layer of the superficial fascia. The deep layer of superficial fascia, fascia of Colles, is thin, aponeurotic in structure, and of considerable strength, serving to bind down the muscles of the root of the penis. It is continuous in front with the dartose tunic, the deep fascia of the penis, the fascia of the spermatic cord, and Scarpa's fascia upon the anterior wall of the abdomen. On either side it is firmly attached to the margins of the rami of the pubis and ischium, lateral to the crus penis, and as far back as the tuberosity of the ischium. Posteriorly it curves around the transversi perineae superficialis, to join the lower margin of the inferior fascia of the urogenital diaphragm. In the middle line it is connected with the superficial fascia and with the median septum of the bulbo cavernosus. This fascia not only covers the muscles in this region, but at its back part sends upward a vertical septum from its deep surface, which separates the posterior portion of the subjacent space into two. The central tendinous point of the perineum. This is a fibrous point in the middle line of the perineum between the urethra and anus, and about 1.25 centimeters in front of the latter. At this point 6 muscles converge and are attached, that is, the sphincter ani externus, the bulbo cavernosus, the 2 transversi perineae superficialis, and the anterior fibers of the levatories ani. The transversus perineae superficialis, transversus perineae, superficial transverse perineal muscle, is a narrow muscular slip which passes more or less transversely across the perineal space in front of the anus. It arises by tendinous fibers from the inner and forepart of the tuberosity of the ischium,